Friends, I am back from Walt Disney World. It's my final video of the year, and I'm doing something I've wanted to do all year long. I put in the extra work, and today I'm going to discover where Disneyland's missing train once lived. The train of the future, which was a train of our past. So why get here at rope drop to discover something that's been missing for over 60 years? Well, I'll tell you why. Because I'm excited. That's why. Excited to be back home, excited to be inside of Disneyland, and excited to wrap up another amazing year on Hey Brickey, and excited that you showed up. My name is Brickey. I'm so happy you're here. Happy holidays and a very happy new year. Let's go. From the moment the park opened in 1955, visitors could travel by steam trains, rockets, boats, carriages, and cars. Nearly every mode of transportation imaginable. But for Walt, there was one glaring omission: a train of the future. At the time, Disneyland was more than just a theme park for Walt. Walt envisioned it as a bustling little city, a place where innovation and imagination would constantly collide. And by 1957, Disneyland was already growing faster than anyone could have imagined. Attendance was booming, and guest expectations were climbing just as high. But Walt had a problem. His grand plans for Tomorrowland, a futuristic showcase of the world to come, were still years away. He needed a stopgap to keep guests excited while he fine-tuned his vision for the future. Enter the Viewliner, a bold experimental project meant to bridge the gap between the steam-powered nostalgia of the past and the sleek innovations of the future. And here's where Disneyland today takes a very different approach. Modern-day fans waiting for big changes, like the long overdue update to Tomorrowland, often find themselves stuck with stagnation instead of creative innovation. Decaying attractions sit in limbo as the park focuses solely on large projects. Walt, on the other hand, wasn't afraid to take risks and test bold ideas in the meantime. Think about how long this dock has sit here unused. Walt would have never let this happen. A year, much less decades. What happened to this so-called train of the future? And is it possible here in present-day Disneyland to uncover any remaining traces of this ambitious experiment? Spoiler, I believe I found a couple of traces of the Viewliner, and they're back in here. I have bad news. Monorail shut down today, and it was going to be a big part of the background of these videos, but pretend that it's going by. The Disneyland Viewliner wasn't just a product of Walt Disney's imagination. It had a real-world inspiration, the Aero Train, an experimental train built in 1956 by General Motors. Dubbed the Train of the Future, the Aero Train was designed to help railroads compete with the booming automobile and airline industries. With its sleek, futuristic design and speeds up to 100 miles per hour, it was meant to revolutionize commuter travel. The Santa Fe Railroad, a close partner of Disneyland, tested the Aero Train and loved its potential. That connection gave Walt Disney's team direct access to the Aero Train specs, inspiring the bullet nose, streamlined cab, and hidden wheels of Disneyland's Viewliner. And just like Santa Fe sponsored Disneyland's railroad and monorail, it also backed the scaled-down version of the Aero Train for Tomorrowland. The Viewliner wasn't just a train, it was two trains. The red Tomorrowland and the blue Fantasyland. Each ran on a continuous loop from its starting point. But where exactly were these two train stations? Let's discover that right now. The Tomorrowland station was futuristic, at least for the 1950s. It was designed as a minimalist transport loading station with a concrete block base, tubular steel supports, and an aluminum roof. Large circle cutouts in the beams gave it a mid-century modern feel, fitting right into Tomorrowland's aesthetic. And fun fact, it wasn't too different than the train station that exists in Tomorrowland today. The banks of the current lagoon aren't too far off from the banks of the Tomorrowland lake. And the station set right on the banks. But where? Now, the Disneyland Skyway ran directly over it. So if we look at the exit point of the Matterhorn, or entry point, depending on which way you're going, and line that up with the station that's back here, that means that directly over my head, somewhere in this straight line, is exactly where the train station for Tomorrowland sat. Now, if we look at the building behind us, which is currently today the Buzz Lightyear building, and we pinpoint this circle on the top of this building, which still exists today, you'll notice that the bar at the end pushes right over to the Viewliner train station, which means that it's set right behind me over here on the banks of the lagoon. because when we look at other photos, you can tell that there's a generous amount of land before you see everything going around Holiday Hill, which luckily for us became Matterhorn Mountain. It's pretty amazing to think that right around here was where the Viewliner would load up guests and take them over to Fantasyland. Now, admittedly, this was pretty tricky to figure out because at this time in Disney's history, there are 3 Autopias, the motorboat cruise is still going, and the monorail doesn't exist yet. So obviously everything was resculpted. This is all just a guess. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below because I know you always have one. Hey friends, if you're enjoying today's video and discovery, looking at the history of the Viewliner, do me and do you a favor, subscribe to Hey Brickey. I would love for you to keep going on this adventure with me. And when you subscribe, it helps make all of this so possible and it costs you absolutely nothing other than a new friend. Thank you for watching and thank you for subscribing to Hey Brickey. Now back to our discovery. I'm so happy you showed up. When it came to designing the Viewliner, efficiency was king. Disneyland in the late 50s wasn't the powerhouse we know it to be today. It was a scrappy operation trying to establish itself by paying off its debt and keeping guests excited at the same time. And the Viewliner, it's a perfect example of how Disneyland could get things done fast without overthinking, which is a big part of why I wanted to do this story today as a little inspiration for management in the new year. Serious question. How long do you think Walt Disney would have been cool with the motorboat dock just sitting here? And don't get me wrong, it's an unbelievable quiet spot in the park, and I'm grateful for it, as I love all the quiet spots, like the one we just lost to the Madame Leota barn. But would Walt Disney had let this dock sit here this long, he maybe wouldn't have come up with a revolutionary ride that would change the world, but he would come up with some sort of solution to keep his Disneyland moving and hustling and bustling along. I feel like modern Disney is intimidated by Walt's success rate, and they're afraid to make decisions, so they end up doing the worst thing at all, making no decisions and just letting things sit and pause for way, way too long. Tomorrowland and this dock are kind of crimes against what Disneyland and Walt Disney stood for. And I hope we don't go another year without getting some sort of update on these spaces. But I honestly don't think we'll hear anything for at least 5 more years. If we look at this from a business perspective, Walt Disney was a guy that wanted to sell theme park tickets. Today's Disney management already knows they're going to sell the tickets. They've lost that scrappiness. They've lost that struggle, that hunger that you have when you're on your way up the mountain. The train debuted on June 21st, 1957 in Tomorrowland with none other than Walt Disney himself behind the wheel. Designed by Imagineer Bob Gurr, the 1/2 scale Viewliner was compact, efficient, and most importantly, completely functional. The engine car was 18 foot long. 5,000-pound beast powered by 1954 Oldsmobile Rocket V8 engine. That's right, the futuristic train ran on gas with an automatic transmission, reverse gear, and brakes. And the Disneyland Railroad's also shut down today. And in true Walt fashion, the speedometers were tweaked to add a little bit of extra magic. Even though the Viewliner's top speed was 30 miles per hour, it had 2 speedometers. One calibrated to the train's scale that showed the train going 120 miles per hour. But in reality, it was moving approximately as fast as the monorail in Space Mountain later would in this same area. And by the way, because it had a V8 Oldsmobile engine, it could officially go about 60, but they weren't that crazy. Okay, so this is the ingenuity of Bob Gurr. Using the Oldsmobile build, a traditional car would be too wide for the 32-inch track. So what did Bob do? He just cut a section of the dashboard out. 14 inches, about where the radio would sit. So when you look at the front of the Viewliner and you notice there's a seam going up the middle of it, that is where they took out a little over a foot and created a Viewliner. That's the type of ingenuity and creativity I'm talking about when a smaller, scrappier Disneyland was on the way up instead of the bloated giant in first place today. And let's talk about efficiency. The train bodies were made of lightweight aluminum on steel frames, designed to balance speed, durability, and cost. Each coach could hold 32 passengers and weighed just under 2,000 pounds. They were small but mighty, running on conventional railroad wheels with automatic doors, communication speakers, and vacuum-operated brakes to keep everything safe and smooth. And of course, the Viewliner wasn't just about style. It had serious power under the hood. Its 8-wheel drive system gave it incredible acceleration, hitting top speed in just 15 seconds. That said, the train's wheels sometimes struggle with traction, causing a little bit of wheel spin, a small flaw in an otherwise efficient design. And think about that low center of gravity. 30 miles per hour at that speed feels crazy fast. Bob Gurr, who drove the train testing, said, "It was exciting to drive my very first train design with Walt sitting in the cab next to me." Amazing. But what Bob didn't know when he designed the Viewliner was that he had no idea he was laying down the groundwork for not just one train system, but two. Oh, the monorail vehicle just went out. The maintenance vehicle. There's hope. We could still maybe get a monorail in today's video. Not like I don't have tons of B-roll, but you know, it's the thrill of the chase, baby. And as impressive as the Viewliner's design was, it wasn't just a standalone attraction. It was part of a much larger picture, a puzzle that Walt Disney was piecing together, one bold experiment at a time. But with hindsight, many of us can look at what the Viewliner was actually preparing Disneyland for. The Viewliner was not connected to Disneyland's mainline steam trains, but it still carved out its own unique place in the park's railroad history, running on a 30-inch track slightly narrower than the 36-inch rails of the Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad. The Viewliner looped around Tomorrowland and Fantasyland on its own self-contained route. When you see the trains pass each other, they're not on two different tracks. There just was a moment designed where each train would pass the other. At one point, the tracks ran parallel to the steam trains, offering a fascinating juxtaposition. The nostalgic past and the sleek future traveling side by side in unison. The Viewliner also tied for third longest railroad in Disneyland history, clocking in at 3/4 of a mile, the same length that the People Mover would later travel. Only the monorail and the Disneyland Railroad would surpass it. Now the trip itself was brief, a quick 3-minute journey, but the route was packed with charm. The rails gracefully curve around then Tomorrowland Lake, giving passengers a glimpse of Tomorrowland from a perspective few attractions could match. Where else can you race a submarine by foot than Disneyland? Now the Fantasyland one was very, very hard to figure out because this area has changed the most. But let's keep two things in mind. Disney likes to repeat its successes and, when all possible, repurpose items as much as possible. Looks like it's a tie. So the best that I could figure out where that Fantasyland Viewliner platform existed was back here inside of Autopia. I'll explain to you why. So keep in mind that the Disneyland Railroad ran north of the Viewliner. The motorboat cruise was over to its west, but not in the same footprint that it is today. It had a shoreside dock versus the peninsula-style dock that protrudes out in the water that we all know as the quiet place in Disneyland. Over here would be the current version of Autopia, and it seems to line up the best on this bridge. There's even a platform that shows how cast members today can walk up onto the platform, but it aligns pretty well with the infrastructure that would have been put in for the bridge and walkway to get on the Viewliner. And it went directly over water when it came in and out of the station. This bridge is graded perfectly to have that, even though one side of it on the east has been graded with dirt, but you can see the way that it would have worked where the motorboats would have cruised around this bridge, but instead of Autopia going across it, there would be the train of the future of our yesterday. I did so much studying, and I have to think that if it's not there, it's really, really close to there. An exciting discovery though when I figured out that that bridge had similar infrastructure that the loading platform for the Viewliner had. So if we think about it, when this did have water in it, Disney probably wanted to save and reroute the water as little as possible. If they already had the infrastructure and sculpting in place to create a bridge, why not use that same infrastructure to put the Autopia overpass on it? If we look, it seems that the beams somewhat line up, and even though it looks pretty shallow right now, keep in mind that they would have built this up to put the underpass for the Autopia there, as it had water going below it. So with a little bit of imagination, as much as I could find, this seems to line up. But I would not be surprised if several areas inside of Autopia also align with the footprint of the Viewliner, because Disney would want to save where possible on routing and grading all of the earth and the waterway, and eventually they would want to use the same footprint for the monorail. I believe when you go across this bridge, you're going across Disney history. Once again, educated guests, would love to hear yours. Hey friends, if you're enjoying today's video and you want to support Hey Brickey, a great way to do so is to go to heybrickey.com, link below, grab your own 1955 undefeated hat or possibly your own Walt 1901 hoodie. I appreciate you supporting Hey Brickey and I appreciate you looking good at the park. Now back to today's video. The Viewliner's time at Disneyland was brief. It opened in June of '57 and carried guests for just over a year before closing on September 30th, 1958. But make no mistake, this was no failure. In its short 15-month run, over 1.4 million guests rode on the Viewliner's tracks, marking its moment in Disney's history as a slightly significant one. So why did the train of the future disappear so quickly? To find part of that answer, we need to look at the inspiration, the Aero Train. Despite its futuristic design, the Aero Train never met its expectations. Poor management, technical bugs, and speed limitations meant it couldn't compete with planes or cars. By 1957, the Aero Train will return to its manufacturer. Its promise of revolutionizing rail travel had been unfulfilled. The Viewliner, on the other hand, achieved exactly what it was designed to do. It wasn't about longevity, it was about bridging the gap to the future, as Disneyland prepared for its massive 1959 expansion, which would bring icons like the Matterhorn, Submarine Voyage, and the Monorail. The Viewliner gave guests a taste of what was to come. And man, this scene would make so much more sense if the Monorail just ripped by like I had planned. And in many ways, it was more successful than the Aero Train that it inspired it. It didn't need to solve the world's transportation problems, it only needed to delight Disneyland visitors, and with its sleek design and thrilling ride, it did exactly that. When you look at that photo of an area, I believe somewhere around here, where you have various versions of Utopia, motorboats, a train to ride, it really does illustrate Walt Disney's love for not only transportation, but adding in quick wins to his park. Rides that he knew weren't forever, but perfect for a while. And I also love the notion of having a direct path from the world of fantasy to the world of tomorrow, really showing the idea that this park was built for dreamers by possibly the biggest dreamer of them all. The Viewliner may have been short-lived, but its legacy is undeniable. In fact, you can still see its influence in one of Disneyland's most iconic attractions, the Monorail, if it were here today. When the Monorail would finally debut in 1959, it inherited the title Train of the Future from its predecessor, and the design similarities between the two are unmistakable. The Mark I Monorail featured lightweight aluminum construction, a wraparound windshield, sleek passenger windows, details that were directly borrowed from the Viewliner. Even the siding and color scheme of the passenger door mechanisms were nearly identical. It was as if the Viewliner's coaches were lifted off of the ground and set up on the monorail beamway. The transportation wasn't just about design, it was about vision. Walt Disney wasn't the type to let an existing project hold him back from dreaming bigger. While the Viewliner had served its purpose, Walt already set his sights on something much more ambitious, a futuristic transportation system that could one day connect Disneyland to the nearby Disneyland Hotel. Didn't happen on day one. Imagine the boldness of this decision. Most modern management would never dare to remove an attraction after just 18 months. But Walt wasn't interested in clinging to the past. Walt saw the Viewliner not as a final product, but as a stepping stone, a test run for what could happen in the future. And with the Monorail, Walt wasn't just thinking about Disneyland in 1959, he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Even Bob Gurr, who designed both trains, acknowledged how closely connected they were. He said, within 2 weeks of designing the Monorail, I had based much of it on the little viewfinder train we built just 2 years earlier. From the face-to-face compartment seating to the wraparound windows, the Monorail's DNA is pure Viewliner. But Walt's genius was in taking a great idea and making it even better, pushing the boundaries of what transportation in Disneyland itself could be and represent to the rest of the world. For this next part of the video, I need you to use your imagination and pretend like we're riding on the Disneyland Railroad, and I can show you where the Disneyland Railroad and the Monorail basically touch each other, not too far down from here. That is where you would see the famous historic shot of both Viewliners and the Disneyland Railroad all passing each other, 3 trains in perfect symmetry, showing all of the potential of transportation from the past to the future, but no transportation today in the present. Thank you for using your imagination. I love this story. I love the idea that Walt never wanted to stay still, and he never saw any part of Disneyland as being too precious to edit. Whereas today, we sit inside of a Tomorrowland that is a placeholder for something big. And in my estimation, probably a decade or so away, but we've already waited a decade or so to get there. Walt would have never stood still. He would have come up with a great imaginative idea for Tomorrowland today, and then probably an even bigger idea for tomorrow. On the Viewliner's opening night in 1957, Walt Disney shared a story that captured the stakes of Disneyland's early days, recalling the park's struggles just 2 years earlier. I owed my bankers $8 million, and they were worried. But now, things are better. I only owe them $6 million. And this wasn't a joke, it was reality. Walt was still in debt and the park's success wasn't guaranteed. Yet, instead of playing it safe, he spent over $200,000, a massive sum in 1957 on a temporary attraction. Why? Because Walt understood something modern Disneyland often seems to forget. You can't afford to sit still. The Viewliner wasn't just a train of the future, it was a symbol of Walt's commitment to growth. Guests needed to see progress, even if the big projects like the massive 1959 expansion were still a couple of years away. The Viewliner filled that gap, keeping excitement alive while Walt and his team quietly planned out what would become icons like the Matterhorn, the Submarine Voyage, and the Monorail, which I wish I had a monorail in this shot. The opening celebration of the Viewliner, Walt also said, "The fun of building the park is finding what the kids want. We need imagination and money, but currently we have more imagination and we have a lot of fun." I love these quotes where Walt is displaying his stress about the financial concerns for Disneyland, but he's leaning into the creative process. And you're always going to have more imagination than money. That's part of the fun of it. It's a statement that reveals so much about Walt Disney. The stress was immense, but he trusted the creative process. For Walt, Disneyland wasn't a theme park. It was a living, breathing city, always growing, always evolving. And one last piece of the Viewliner, now the Toonliner that sits on the exit to the gift shop of Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, a little subtle nod to the past, and accurate by being the blue Viewliner, as we now know as the Fantasyland Viewliner, which would be the closest to Mickey's Toontown. And also the floor mat when you exit through the gift shop, if you look down, you'll notice that icon is the Viewliner with the distinct seam down the middle of the window, which once again we know, that's where they had to remove 14 inches to get that radio out there. Bob Gurr ain't got time to rock and roll when he's Viewlining, baby. And while modern Disneyland often waits years to announce new projects, Walt was already promoting the next big idea that very day. Between runs of the Viewliner, Walt hinted at plans for a haunted house attraction, teasing the biggest assortment of ghosts in the world. He also outlined an ambitious vision for Disneyland's future, a Thomas Edison Square, a Liberty Street, and even a New Orleans Square. Friends, the Viewliner might be the first place in recorded history where Walt Disney teases the Haunted Mansion. Yes! Now it's officially a ghost train. When the time came to dismantle the attraction in 1958, Walt didn't just scrap it, he tried to give its 1,100 railroad ties to good friend Ward Kimball. When Ward didn't need them, they ended up with animator Ollie Johnson for his backyard railroad in Julian, California, a great place to go in the fall. Walt even pitched them as shuttles for Dodger Stadium and Griffith Park, though neither plan panned out. But Dodger Stadium could definitely have used a Viewliner. Man, oh man, do I hate going to Dodgers games and getting stuck in that parking lot. The Dodgers are the only baseball team that I would suggest to bring a football to so you have someone to throw in the parking lot afterwards. The Viewliner wasn't a failure. It was a testament to Walt's hustle and his ability to solve problems on the fly. He understood that Disneyland's success depended on its ability to keep moving forward, even if that meant creating bridge attractions. What's up, bud? Thanks for saying hi, I appreciate it. To keep guests entertained, while he knew secretly in the background, bigger ideas were taking shape. And that's the difference. The Disneyland of today wouldn't dream of building something like the Viewliner, a temporary attraction that fills the gap between major expansions. But Walt didn't see Disneyland as a finished product. He saw it as a canvas for constant creativity, a place where the next idea was just around the corner. And every train could be the train of the future. The Viewliner wasn't one of the only attractions built in this window of time when Walt was adding in simpler attractions to beef up attendance. You can watch this video about the Disneyland Skyway, one of Walt's greatest additions to the park and one of Disney's biggest mistakes, removing it.